This is a story about peril in the Pacific. It's the story about a new U.S.-sponsored trade agreement called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. "11 countries are now engaged in TPP negotiations. The United States, Canada, Mexico, Peru, Chile, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Malaysia, Brunei, and Vietnam. Japan is also considering joining the talks, and other Pacific Rim countries may participate in the future." The U.S. model for the Trans-Pacific trade deal needs to be completely remade, top to bottom. Friends of the Earth is calling for a fair deal for people and the planet, or no deal at all. An obsessive secrecy surrounds the negotiations. The public, the press, and even members of the U.S. Congress are denied access to the negotiating text. What are they hiding? First, that the TPP is being written under the supervision of multinational corporations. The TPP text is secret to all except so-called cleared advisors. In the United States, there are over 600 such cleared trade advisors, almost all of whom represent corporations or industry groups. Second, they are hiding the fact that the TPP is not so much about trade as it is about deregulating the Pacific economy, providing super rights to corporations. On the morning of Wednesday, June 13, 2012, the TPP investment chapter was leaked. The investment chapter is perhaps the most important and the most dangerous section of the whole agreement. The leaked text put authority over environmental and climate policy into the hands of business-friendly international tribunals, many of them convened by the World Bank in Washington, D.C.
And so what do the corporations affected do? They run to these international trade courts and try to become more powerful than governments themselves. They try to essentially replace democracy and public policy with the rules that the corporations write. Corporations would like to just fight these battles with high-priced lawyers in closed rooms in Washington, D.C.
The investment chapter would have dangerous implications for the environment. A similar provision of the U.S.-Ecuador bilateral investment treaty allowed the oil giant Chevron to sue the government of Ecuador.
In the mid-1960s, Texaco, which is now Chevron, developed the oil fields in the eastern Ecuadorian Amazon. The indigenous and local people who live in this area say that Texaco deliberately dumped billions of gallons of toxic wastewaters, drilling muds, and oil into their environment, causing a social, cultural, and environmental crisis.
Chevron es culpable. Chevron ha destruido todo lo que es nuestra riqueza natural.
This area was a pristine rainforest, one of the most ecologically diverse places on the planet, and the homeland to many indigenous cultures. But after Texaco arrived, it became a tropical wasteland. Literally, they would drill for oil and dump the formation waters, the drilling muds. They would just dump them into unlined waste pits, hundreds of unlined waste pits, Olympic-sized pool unlined waste pits. And of course, because it's a rainforest, these waste pits would overflow into rivers and streams, causing what experts say is a rainforest Chernobyl.
The indigenous people and poor settlers of the Oriente region suffered an epidemic of cancer and other illnesses they say resulted from Texaco's dumping. Death, miscarriages, and birth defects cut a swath through communities. threatening some indigenous groups with extinction. The destruction of the Ecuadorian rainforest, with its world-class biodiversity, was also devastating. This rainforest Chernobyl affected an area the size of Rhode Island, and a court-appointed independent expert in Ecuador found that the damages from the dumping amounted to $27 billion. Indigenous groups and communities sought justice through the courts, and after 18 years of litigation, a provincial court in Ecuador ruled in favor of the communities, ordering Chevron to pay $18 billion. But on February 17, 2012, an international tribunal established under the U.S.-Ecuador Bilateral Investment Treaty put all that in jeopardy. The tribunal told the president, the parliament, and the courts of Ecuador to suspend enforcing the judgment against Chevron.
People around the world, wherever I travel, are dismayed by the Chevron Tribunal's actions. But the underlying problem is the flawed model for U.S. bilateral investment treaties and investment chapters in free trade agreements. The U.S.-Ecuador bilateral investment treaty is typical because it favors the profits of big oil companies, mining multinationals, and the wealthy.
So why is it that the people that have suffered the most, the local and indigenous populations, why is it that they don't have a voice at the International Investment Tribunal? Why is it that U.S. policy favors financial interests and big corporate interests like those of Chevron over those of the people or the environment?
The overreaching of the Chevron Tribunal should be a warning to negotiators from the United States and other Pacific countries as they meet in coming months to fashion a Trans-Pacific Partnership trade agreement.
The investment chapter of the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership would in effect create a separate court for capital. Now, the arbitrators or the judges in these tribunals are typically international commercial lawyers who may one day serve as independent, quote-unquote, arbitrators, and then on the next day return as corporate counsel. The other thing is that most arbitrators are actually from the United States and Western Europe, while most of the defendants are from the Global South. And so I call this a kangaroo court.
The TPP investment chapter would provide greater rights for foreign investors. These super rights for big oil, big pharma, and Wall Street investors go far beyond domestic constitutional protections of property rights and due process in the United States. In fact, the U.S. already favors property rights and corporate rights far greater than almost every other country in the world.
The worst thing about the proposed TPP investment chapter is that it would likely result in crippling awards of money damages against developing countries. Now, developing countries, some of them face billions in liability. And just the fear of such ruinous judgments will force countries to settle investor claims, even the ones that are unjust. Worse, countries will actually back away from instituting new legislation and regulations designed to protect the environment, protect public health, and the public interest. Some people call this the chilling effect. I call it the deep freeze, where you have sovereign democracies that will actually be afraid of regulating for the environment and for people. And people power is the way to fight for a fair deal. The people have been demanding a fair deal all around the Pacific Rim. Jesse Jackson and Ben & Jerry spoke out in Chicago. The Peruvian people called for a fair deal. In Australia, environmentalists and trade unionists marched in solidarity. The Japanese called for economic justice. Opposition to corporate power is building in New Zealand. Malaysians are defending their national sovereignty. They are speaking out against an international trade regime that pays polluters rather than making polluters pay. They are speaking out against a system in which property rights trump environmental responsibility. They're speaking out against kangaroo courts making economic policy for the Pacific region, and saying that it's time to throw the secret drafts of the Trans-Pacific Partnership into the dustbin.